another episode of SheSpeaks, where we spotlight women driving innovation, leadership, and transformation in tech. Today's guest is an engineering powerhouse, a champion of sustainable technology, and someone who's truly redefining technical leadership, Jessica Middlemiss. Jessica is the Chief Technology Officer at Puraffinity, where she leads the charge in developing novel media to remove harmful PFAS chemicals from water. Her mission is rooted in impact, using engineering to create real environmental and societal change. And over the span of her impressive career, Jessica's held leadership roles across global companies like Dyson, Sartorius, and Rolls-Royce, covering everything from R&D and product development to quality systems and operational strategy. She's built and scaled teams across continents, championed change in highly regulated environments, and is a passionate advocate for mentoring the next generation of engineers. And today we'll dive into her journey, her work at the intersection of materials, science, and sustainability, and what it really means to lead with purpose in deep tech. Jessica, welcome to SheSpeaks.
Heidi, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to discuss all of these things, and that was a very flattering introduction.
A very true one, though. But thank you so much as well for joining us. And maybe we could start off with a little bit about your background. So could you share a bit about your career journey? You know, what led you to your current role as CTO at Puraffinity?
So I started my career having graduated from Imperial with a master's in material science, and I was lucky enough to get a place on Rolls-Royce's graduate scheme, where I practiced as a materials engineer for quite a few years. The graduate scheme there is fantastic because you get to try lots of different teams before you sort of settle somewhere. And I settled in repair technology, and I loved the idea that we were trying to prolong the life of these very expensive technical aerospace components. So that kind of flicked my switch immediately for at least reuse in a kind of reuse and recycle way. So it was a really good technical first grounding. I later moved to Dyson, where I spent 10 years of my career. So I guess the first 8 years of my career, including the Rolls-Royce years, were much more technically focused, where I was practicing material science. But then as I moved through the ranks at Dyson, I was able to start building up a team. So that was when I started building my management experience and gradually becoming more manager and less technical engineer. So I guess, it starts with a kind of 10% management and 90% engineering. And then before you know it, you're up at kind of 50-50 somewhere. So it was a really nice, gentle evolution, I think. And I've always really enjoyed working with people and managing and developing people. So that was really good. And I then sort of halfway through my Dyson time, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to cover a 6-month maternity cover role, where I was able to manage a larger team of about 30 engineers for the first time. So I was managing a team of roughly 5. And so to go to 30 was quite a big jump, in literally the next day. And the other difference was that I was, instead of just managing individual contributors, I was managing people who were managing people. What was nice about having that opportunity for the 6-month cover was that I could almost try before I buy. I could see if I liked managing at that kind of bigger scale. And if I hated it, I had the opportunity to step back into a more technical career path. As it turned out, I absolutely loved it, and I was gutted that I then had to pass it back to its rightful owner, although we're still friends today and she's lovely. And it's another female engineer who's awesome, actually, so that's really nice too. But having had that great experience, I was then able to pursue more management opportunities within Dyson. And obviously I'd had a good experience, and luckily they felt that it had been a good experience too. So it was nice for them to sort of see my skills and capability in that area, and it gave me credibility when I was applying for different roles within the business. So then I was able to do quality management, where I was kind of broadening my business exposure, because quality thinks a lot more about the product during its life and the satisfaction of the customers, and also any issues that happen within the supply chain. So that was, instead of being more focused on kind of design and design support, looking at use cases was a really interesting life cycle piece for me, and it broadened my skills. And then I was head of operations at the Dyson Institute for 2 years, which was completely different, not engineering. It's Dyson's in-house undergraduate degree program. So the product is a degree and the customers are students effectively. But what was really nice about that is I was able to kind of learn other business skills like finance and governance and operational planning, but I was also able to really flex my muscles with developing the next generation of engineers. And that is what fulfillment feels like for me. So that was just really wonderful. Sadly, that was during the pandemic, which made lots of things challenging for lots of people, I think. And during that time, I guess I started to reevaluate what was important to me in my career. And although I enjoyed working at the Dyson Institute, I did miss that kind of technical focus that you get from working within engineering. And so it was at that point that I decided to pursue engineering roles outside of Dyson, where I was hoping to find something that had a more directly positive impact on society or the environment. So that's what led me to join Sartorius, which makes medical devices or devices that are used in the development of drugs and therapies and vaccines. And then since then, I've been lucky enough to have been headhunted into two different startup CTO roles, firstly at Matter and now at Puraffinity. And both of those companies are water focused. So they're pushing for both environmental and human health improvement. So that kind of purpose and technical combination just feels like a really great fit for me.
I mean, you've covered so many different sectors, so many different industries here, from biopharma to consumer tech. So I'm curious about knowing what common threads you found in these experiences.
Well, people, definitely. Um, and technical people wanting to grow and learn and wanting to do their best for a business. Um, Obviously, from the business side of that, so not thinking so much about the team, but thinking about the business, it's about making a great product that can generate revenue. And in Dyson, Rolls-Royce, and Sartorius, it's more pure. It's purely a profit aim, really. There are shareholders to think about, or I mean, not in Dyson's case, but certainly for Rolls-Royce and Sartorius. Whereas in organisations like Matter and Puraffinity, it's this nice balance between revenue to show potential for profit and to drive more investment and to enable you to grow the business, but also impact. So, and by that I mean environmental impact. Liters or gallons or cubic meters of water treated that are now clean and free from PFAS or free from microfibers. And if you think about it at a more technical level from engineering, it's always safety, quality, cost, speed to market. And those are always consistent because you've always got competitors. You always need to keep your end users safe. You need to meet the regulations. So there are a lot, although the regulations are different, obviously, the framework still exists. So I guess I've certainly, since I've been in more management roles, the main theme has been supporting great people to deliver great technical results for the businesses. And so I end up being more like an enabler, really. I provide the focus, I provide the context within the business that those talented engineers and scientists need so that they know they're doing the right thing.
We've previously talked about, how you've led quite diverse technical teams as well. And what do you think have been some of the biggest challenges in managing those innovation-driven teams?
I think for me, on a personal level, the transition from managing a team of people that were doing things that I knew about, so managing a materials team, where I was the biggest expert in the room and I could teach them technically, to then managing teams of people that had technical expertise that I'd never even come into contact with. So that 6 months secondment, I went from being the leader of a materials team to managing people doing computational structural analysis and fluid dynamics, acoustics, all sorts of different really specialist technical disciplines that I didn't have deep knowledge of. And it was two things. Firstly, being comfortable not being the most knowledgeable person in the room, but recognizing that you could still coach people to good outcomes, even though you weren't the most knowledgeable technical person in the room. And also just being honestly curious about it and getting up that learning curve quickly. And also recognizing that my job was no longer to deliver engineering, but was to enable other people to deliver engineering. And someone described it to me as achieving through others. But recognizing that me writing a 10-page report is not necessarily the metric of success and productivity anymore.
Yeah.
So from a personal perspective, that was definitely what was challenging.
And would you say that was part of your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I think so. And you're trying to surround yourself with good people and to trust them to deliver and use their skills in the right way. Um, I also think so. Another challenging aspect of management is kind of managing through the bad times.
Hmm.
So, like, it's really easy to manage a team that's high performing, where you've handpicked all the great people and they're all really great experts. They've been in their field for 5, 6, 7, 10 years. But, I've made people redundant. I've had to fire people. I've managed people who are going through massive personal challenges, like the loss of a child, or the loss of a parent, or a divorce, or a major health situation. And it's managing with compassion and doing the right thing by the individuals, but also the business in those circumstances that I think are kind of the biggest test.
Yeah, I think even, I have a HR background. I think we kind of talked about this as well before. And I really believe in the whole idea of, kind HR. It could mean something different to everyone, but I think that you have the business's interest at heart as well, but also the employees. It needs to be like a nice balance between the two. And I think that the image that comes with the title of CTO is often quite, harsh and, makes tough decisions, but unapologetic and, which we should be unapologetic to a certain extent in various contexts. But there's just this real kind of, harsh image of a CTO, whereas the way that you're approaching it is very much with kindness and, like you said, with compassion, which I think is quite important.
Absolutely, and
Um,
I agree. I think people think that CTOs, or maybe there's a perception that CTOs are kind of walking brains, right? And so it's all about results and technical outcomes. But actually, what we are is leaders of technical teams. And I think my general leadership philosophy has always been more people orientated than results orientated. Having observed different managers and leaders through my career, both firsthand because they've been my managers, but also just generally in organizations because I'm a very chatty human being and I talk to a lot of people. I think when you've got people that are happy, they they are motivated to deliver well for their organization. When you're focusing only on results, people get demoralized and it's really bad, not just for individuals, but also for team morale. And then you tend not to get good productivity.
yeah, and does that kind of approach to your management style, does that come from something that you've learned on your own, or is it something that someone inspired, perhaps, that you worked with, who was your manager, a leader that you looked up to in the past?
That's a really great question. I think I've tried to take the good bits of all my managers and tried to deliberately do the opposite of the bad bits of all my managers. But obviously, good versus bad is kind of my personal opinion mostly. But networking widely and hearing other people's experiences of management and what's frustrating to them has also been really helpful. And I've been on the receiving end of incredibly compassionate management. And the difference that it made to me in those times of crisis was absolutely huge. So I guess, yeah, it's about learned experiences but then actively thinking about what made that a good experience and trying to replicate it. I would also say my dad was a huge influence for me. He was a small business owner. He ran a business with his brother and their business partner. It was a scaffolding company. So you can imagine that the types of people that he was managing are quite different from the types of people that I'm managing. But he always tried to be compassionate and thoughtful. And he's a really popular and gregarious human being just generally. And I see him sort of interacting with the world. And 99% of the interactions that he has are positive, and they're positive for him and the other person. And that just seems good.
It's so nice that you have that kind of, it's not because I was expecting, I guess, more, oh, I had this leader and I worked for this manager to get, you do learn from everyone, but it's so nice to hear that you've learned that from your parent as well.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
nice.
yeah, it's really lovely and it's, very lucky. So, that's
I
awesome.
feel very lucky, I have to
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
absolutely. And, I guess we're as a woman as well in the sectors that you've been in as a leader, what has been some of the challenges that you've faced along the way?
When I was early in my career, I did keep account of the largest meeting I was in where I was the only woman. Not because I had any sort of chip on my shoulder, but just because I found it quite amusing. So I definitely remember, like maybe quite early on in my career, within the first couple of years of being with Rolls-Royce, I was sat in the room and I was the only woman out of 26 people. I just thought this seems a bit mad. And I went to a conference once, the materials related to conference, and there were probably about 40 attendees, and it was like a small invitation only type conference. I was the only woman, and I was about 26, and I was the only person in the room under 35 as well. So that was really like, wow, not only am I the only female, but I'm the only like young, like early career person. So that was kind of surprising, but I just kind of never really let it bother me. I always walk into a room trying to feel, not telling myself, but knowing that I'm supposed to be there and that I'm there for a reason and that my opinion is important. Um, Also early in my career, I've had to do things like walk 2 buildings back to get the key to the ladies' loo because there are no women on site, and so they've locked the loo so they don't have to clean it and stuff like that. But it's just I try not to take it too personally. It's just a kind of circumstantial thing, and I'm lucky that I don't really feel that I've ever had any overtly sexist behaviour to deal with in my career journey. And actually, I've been lucky enough to work with a whole load of men who have been amazing advocates for me personally and for women generally in the engineering sector. I've never had a female mentor. They've all been men, and they've all been absolutely phenomenal. And they kind of just the gender kind of isn't a factor. It's just about me as a human being, and it's about what I know and what I'm bringing and what will be good for me in my career and for my soul, really. And I feel really proud because I know that lots of women have had to suffer overt sexism in the workplace, and that absolutely sucks. Um, but I can't lie and say that I have because I've been really lucky not to ever have that.
Yeah, and I think, it's important to hear that as well. It's important for women who do maybe afraid of experiencing that. Maybe they're very new in their journey to know that actually there are great people out there, great women and also great men who will support you as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
would say the one element I guess which was a bit more female centric for me, I've had 2 children. So they're 10 and 8 now. And definitely that period of time where you're on maternity leave and then you're trying to come back into the workplace if you choose to do that from maternity leave was really challenging both times. And I think that was partly because maybe the organisations weren't actually as geared up to deal with people with mothers who wanted to continue their careers. But also engineering can be quite a hard career to do flexible hours or part time. If your role requires you to be in a laboratory or in uh, on site, for example, then that you're typically working to particular schedules and deadlines, and so there isn't that level of flexibility about not working on a Thursday. If a thing is being delivered to site that you need to be there to commission on a Thursday, you're going to have to be there. So I think sometimes engineering roles are quite hard for people to return to when they've had a career break, whether that's parent related or whether that's caring or whether that's an illness or whatever. I feel like maybe there's in some sectors a bit of a lack of flexibility there. Um, it wasn't too bad for me. I actually wanted to come back more or less full time, so I made it work. But it was hard. And then there's also the kind of mum guilt thing, right? You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in that situation. You see loads of other mothers going down to 2 days a week and being earth mothers, and you feel like you want to stop talking about nappies and bottles and get back into work and use your brain again. But you're at work and people are like, oh, didn't you want to stay at home with your child? Or you're at home with your child and people are like, oh, didn't you want to go back to work? Like, you just can't win.
no, absolutely. I think it's a difficult one, and gosh, I've had so many conversations with lots of people in biotech, and biotech's one of those industries where it's very, very difficult to be a mother. It's like you said, you're working in a laboratory. Um, the research that you're doing is very much life or death, and it's very difficult to actually just leave that and go on maternity leave, and it's very difficult. So like an interesting conversation I had before with a leader in biotech, she talked about going child free, and that was her choice. But she's saying a lot of women leave biotech because of that.
Yeah.
So it really is a struggle, and I don't know what the solution is, but I guess that's what conversations are for. And I don't know what the workaround to that kind of thing is, unfortunately.
I can speak of my solution. My
Great.
solution is having a brilliant husband. So I'm lucky. I'm not a single parent. I'm married, and my husband is the father of my children. And he works a corporate job, which is also pretty busy, but he is absolutely 100%. Like we're not. It's not like we do 50-50. We do 100-100.
Yeah.
And I've been ill recently, hence the croaky voice, right? But so I've been doing 20 and he's been doing 180 basically, because that's kind of how it plays out. But then obviously he'll get me back at some point. But you know, I do the school run sometimes. He does the school run sometimes. Watch each other's work calendars and communicate really actively about, well, I need to be in Glasgow on this day, or I need to be in London on that day, or can I stay over here? Does that work with your work schedule? And we communicate with each other about it, and we also communicate with our employers about it, because we're both in relatively senior leadership roles, and I think there's a need to model that as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, he's absolutely the enabler for my career.
But in terms of kind of the more kind of, I guess, tech side of things, you've worked on everything from R&D to large scale manufacturing. How do you balance that innovation with practicality?
Oh my goodness, that's such a difficult question to answer. I also think it's different in different organizations. So firstly, I would say it really is important to balance it. That's the first thing to say, because what you don't want is a really successful product and then nothing coming through the pipeline. That's death for an organization, and that means no work for any of the workforce, and that sucks. So it is really important to balance it. I think when a team is large enough, so like when I was working at Dyson, for example, it's really great if you can have teams that are focused on innovation and other teams that are focused on delivery. And quite often within engineering, I've found that people are more visionary or more implementer, and therefore they're kind of better suited to kind of reactive firefighting type roles versus more proactive blue skies thinking creative roles. However, in smaller organizations like mine or Matter, where I was before, um, it's typically the same teams that need to be delivering on both of these things. So, in that sense, what I've always tried to do is integrate next generation product innovation into the core deliverables for the technical team. So they don't feel guilty about working on innovation because it's something that we're trying to measure and something that we expect results on. So I always try to contextualize it and help people to know roughly how much of their time they should be spending on one thing or the other. But it's about giving people permission and freedom to actually do it, and valuing that innovation as something that's important and drives value, even though that value might be realized in the future.
And do you think is this how you would approach that change management when you say that you're introducing these new things to the teams?
That's a good question. I think, yeah. So providing context, so any sort of change, providing context as to why a change is happening, is really important. So whether it's because a regulatory framework has moved, or whether it's because there's something wrong with the old system, or I mean, brilliant if you're trying to solve a problem in response to feedback that the team has given you, that's even better. You said we did type approach. Um, for me, making the users, or the people that are going to be using a new process or engaging with a new thing that you're changing, part of the solution is really helpful, because then they feel consulted and empowered, and it means the outcome's likely to land better. So yeah, I think context and consultation where possible. Obviously, sometimes you have to do things really at pace, and then you have to ask for trust, I suppose. But then also sharing plenty of information, absorb information well from different sources. So I would always like to have, video type um, content that people can engage with in their own time, live action demonstrations and Q&A sessions, um, written information, so that however people like to consume their knowledge, there's something for everybody. there. So for me, that's also really important. That informing piece needs to be done so that it works for the whole range of styles.
And it's really nice that you actually talk about the kind of different styles and the different ways people, I guess, learn as well, and kind of almost catering to that too. So, kind of talking about the those individuals within your team, what do you look for when you're hiring technical talent? Like, are there any skills or traits that stand out to you?
Yeah, so at Puraffinity, we definitely place a lot of importance on a values match. Um, and that is usually something we measure through sort of behavior-based interview questions. So, you know, in this situation, what would you do? Or can you give us an example of a time when you've, you know, faced challenges getting stakeholders to agree to a plan for a project, that sort of thing. Um, on a personal level, what I'm looking for is, first and foremost, is curiosity. I want people who are curious and have a thirst for knowledge and information. And you can kind of see that straight away in an interview because they're typically curious about the company and the mission. So it's really a very easy measure. But sometimes an interview could be incredibly flat, you know, because someone needs to work to live. And don't get me wrong, I don't want people to live to work. That doesn't feel healthy either. But I want people that are excited to be getting up and coming to work and doing the things that we're doing. So that curiosity piece is really important for me. And then authenticity is really important as well. I don't want you to present some perfectly manicured version of what you think I'm looking for. I just want you to approach it as you. And if that's a good fit, then that's good for all of us. I'm really passionate about just being myself. And I want everybody to always feel that they can be their self. And so I always try to put people at ease in interviews so they can relax and just be authentic. And the third thing that I would typically be looking for is that ability and willingness to collaborate and to kind of connect the dots. In particularly in a startup, we cannot afford siloed working. We all have to get stuck in and be willing to help out when somebody's off sick and to really be able to say, oh, do you know what? I'm doing this thing, but I think, you know, and I'm a scientist, but I think that we need engineering input for this reason and we need some analytics support here. I'm going to go and just talk to those people. It doesn't need to come up to me and then go back down to those people. I need you to recognize the skills and capabilities of the rest of the team and use them.
I think in a startup environment, especially, um, the whole idea of it being mission driven, right? Especially with what you're doing at Pure
Absolutely.
Affinity. I find it was quite interesting when you mentioned the questions that people ask. People come with curiosity. I find that whenever I do like a screening with a candidate or a client especially who's very mission driven or they're quite a small startup, when they do ask more questions about the company and they want to find out more about the company, that does make all the difference.
Yeah.
And when they
And
go
it's
into an
lovely when they've done
interview,
their research as
yeah,
well.
exactly this. And, I always encourage that they continue that when they are invited for an interview as well, because it shows that you're trying to understand the company, you're trying to understand the role, where you sit, what your job will be, and how you can actually bring your expertise to that role as well. And see if it's a good
Exactly.
alignment, because it's a two-way thing, right? Because you're trying to also see if you align, if the company aligns well with you. It's really important to show that kind of interest and curiosity into the company. I think. I mean, if we have our own business and if we're running our own, that's the kind of people we'd want on the team as well. But at the same time, we also have to give them, like you're doing, we have to give them an environment where they can thrive, they can be themselves, and they can,
Absolutely.
it's a two-way thing. I really like your approach to hiring, and it's really interesting. What do you think that companies can do better when it comes to hiring and, retaining diverse talent?
So I've been involved in hiring for lots of different companies, and obviously every company has its own way of doing things. Something that I love that we do at Pure Affinity is that we completely anonymize CVs as they come in for applications. So I've got no idea about the profile of the candidate. I can see work history, so I can perhaps make some inferences about age if I choose to, or about their educational background, for example. But fundamentally, I've got no idea about ethnicity or gender or any of those other things. So immediately the first screening is done on merit, which I love. But the other thing that I really like about what we do at Puraffinity is that, or what we can do at Puraffinity, I will say, is that we've already got a really diverse workforce, massively diverse, huge number of countries and nationalities represented, lots of different religions, more than 50% female actually in the organisation. And so through that candidate's journey, we can expose them to lots of different people as well. So we're kind of demonstrating our commitment to diversity to those candidates. And I feel like if you're a candidate from a more minority background, seeing something of yourself or other minorities represented within that organisation through the hiring process is pretty powerful, actually. So that's what I really like. I think it's all too easy to just for it to be the hiring managers. And if you've got that challenge that a lot of engineering firms have got right now, where most of your middle and senior management are white and male, maybe that's a harder thing to do. But I think consciously, it's a really good thing to try to do.
It's part of kind of, continuing that as well once they are on board, that kind of fostering that culture of growth and development as well. But
Um,
how do you transition that into your teams once they're on board?
we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee as part of Puraffinity. So we work really carefully on that. We use a platform called Culture Plus from the Royal Academy of Engineering, which supports us with that kind of cultural and diversity piece. I think the other thing I want to touch on here, actually, Dee, is
Yeah,
um, diversity. Obviously, I've been talking about it in terms of religion and ethnicity and gender, but actually, diversity of route into engineering is also a really interesting one. A lot of companies can get caught in this: we only want people with PhDs, or we only want people with master's degrees cycle. And for me, that is not important. So whenever we're writing a job ad, I always look to try to say or equivalent, or instead of saying we need a chemistry degree, I might say a degree in chemistry or another related subject with relevant industrial experience. Because I've worked with some absolutely amazing people who have come up through an apprenticeship route. They haven't got a degree, but they're more knowledgeable than I am in certain areas. And so it's about just opening it up so that we can actually attract the best talent. And that's good for us as well as good for them.
I think there's a particular thing I see on some job ads, which I really love to see, is at the end of it, this extensive job description, it says, even if you don't feel like you fit every single requirement, please still apply. And I
Yep.
like that. I think that's such a good way of going about things because psychologically, I'm just sitting there and thinking as I'm reading this, oh, you seem like nice people. You
Yeah.
care about people and you understand that, talent can mean anything. It's not just the tick box exercise, right? You've got this, you've got that. There's so much more. There's soft skills.
Actually being self-aware enough to be able to go into that interview and say the areas of your job description that I'm not strong at are these things, and this is what I'd like to do about it
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, it's about being solution focused. I'm not naturally the most organized person. And when I'm asked that kind of typical question of what are your strengths and weaknesses, it's like, well, my weakness is I'm not naturally organized. I've got ADHD. That's probably a lot to do with it. But I built this scaffolding around it and I'm able to actually look. You will think I'm the most organized person, but it doesn't come naturally to me. So this is the
It's a
solution
learned
to this
behavior.
problem.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
no, I completely agree with that. There's a lot of conversation to be had around that topic, I think for sure. Get into more about Pure Affinity and the future vision. Can you share a bit more about your mission and what excites you most about about the work that's being done?
As I touched on earlier in our conversation, um, this impact driven element to both Pure Affinity and Matter, who I worked with before, has been really fulfilling for me. So, Pure Affinity's vision is to improve human environmental health by effectively removing PFAS from water. Um, PFAS is toxic forever chemicals that don't break down in the natural environment, has been linked to a whole host of serious human health problems. It's used everywhere. It's in the obvious one is non-stick cookware, but it's waterproofing on things. It's used in electronics. It's sometimes used in medicines and vaccines. It's very extensively used in what are called aqueous film forming foams, which are used to fight big fires. So anywhere where there's a military base or an airport, it's likely that film forming foams have been used, and those will have contaminated water in the vicinity. So the way that we're tackling that is by developing novel adsorbent materials. So that's where the material scientist in me gets excited, because we're trying to use really clever chemistry and technology to solve this problem. And what the materials do is they attract the PFAS molecules from the water, and they kind of stick to the surface of our media. And there are other technologies that do this already, but ours is more targeted for PFAS. It's not broad spectrum. It's PFAS specific, really. And we can do it with a lot less material. So that then leads to this kind of life cycle analysis where you're creating less waste. The important thing here is that the PFAS needs to be destroyed somehow. So we're collecting that PFAS. We see ourselves as part of a kind of PFAS cycle. And it's not cradle to cradle, it's firmly cradle to grave in this situation, because it needs to be destroyed. Otherwise, you're just moving the problem. So we're also able to collaborate with people that are thinking about PFAS and working on and developing technologies for PFAS destruction, so that we can kind of become part of a chain of technologies to solve this problem. So it's exciting for me because I feel like we're part of a movement rather than just a kind of lone wolf, and I love that. And I can link it back to environmental benefits and also human health benefits, and that is just purpose in a nutshell.
That's not amazing. Do you know I got rid of all of my Teflon pans after I
Yes, Steve.
initial
Yes.
conversation? I threw them all. I had so many scratches, ones that I just potentially just refused to acknowledge. And then when I had a real good look at it, I was like, oh God, it's got scratches everywhere. I must get rid of this now.
Yeah. What's
And
my
my mum's like,
ingesting?
I know exactly. And my mum was like, yep, I've been telling this, I've been saying this for years. I said, no, but Jessica, she knows.
Yay, I've made a difference to one person. If I can do that,
Well,
periodically, that's going to make a
yeah,
small difference. It's great. I'm very
don't
happy. Thanks,
worry.
Steve.
You've made a difference to my mum. She's throwing them all away. My partner's throwing them all away. They're all
Woo!
gone. Stainless steel, cast iron is the way forward, apparently.
Love it.
But yeah, I mean, what's the long-term vision for Puraffinity?
So we want to be able to deploy the technology across loads of different water applications. So it's about drinking water, but it's also about reducing emission into the environment. So that could be through industrial wastewaters or remediating environmental water that is contaminated as well. So that takes a bit of time because, as you can imagine, water is a very regulated industry, and we absolutely need to make sure that we're meeting all of those regulations. So that's a work in progress, and we hope to have a kind of suite of materials. So PFAS is a hugely broad term, and there are thousands of different species of PFAS, and different types of chemistry attract different types of PFAS. So we're focusing on the ones that are really prevalent in the environment, but there are others that maybe our media doesn't work so well for at the moment. And so our innovation pipeline is trying to target those ones next. So the idea is that we will have a suite, and if you've got water which has got PFAS A, PFAS B, and PFAS C in it, we'll be able to recommend one or a mixture of media that can correctly treat your water, I guess. And then alongside that, we're trying to think about the CO2 emissions and the life cycle of our product to make sure that we are destroying PFAS and not moving the problem around, but also so that we're trying to do that in a low impact way for the environment as well. Because it's no good having a great environmental impact in use, but having a massive carbon footprint during manufacture or disposal. So it's trying to look at that holistically.
Yeah, and would you say that would be probably the biggest challenge in developing this?
Yeah, and also, so water regulation is different in different parts of the world, but that makes it complicated to get a product to market globally. The drinking water regulations in America are very different from in Europe. Some states and some countries mandate higher standards than the kind of federal or European level, and so navigating that regulatory landscape is also quite challenging, particularly as a startup where we've got limited resources and we're trying to get a product into market and doing a good job. So I would say that that's also quite challenging.
I think anytime it's to do with regulations, it's always going to be that little bit more challenging. And as the company's growing, as your kind of long-term vision has taken shape, naturally the kind of hiring needs are going to develop as well. And so, what does that look like in terms of the future?
So right now we've got some roles that are open. We're hiring particularly in a process development space, which is where we're trying to scale up the manufacturing of our products so we can do things. We've got one product that's already at big scale, but there's another product coming to our pipeline that we can make at a lab scale, and we're just about to start that journey into making it in tens of kilograms and then hundreds of kilograms. So we need people that come from similar backgrounds, maybe pharmaceuticals or other chemical manufacturing, to support us on that journey. Other than that, we haven't got loads of roles open at the moment because we're working to be revenue generating and profitable, with the expectation that at some point we will do another funding round, which will then lead to the next sort of tranche of scaling. So my expectation is that once we go through our next sort of major funding round, we will have a plan in place to build out and scale the business in other areas, and then we'll need to recruit to fill those skills gaps for whatever's next.
I know that funding can be particularly difficult for that sector. How have you found, if you can share, how have you found funding within this particular sector?
So I have only been with Puraffinity for 7 months. So most of the funding that Puraffinity has secured has been before my time. But I can say that we've been unusually successful in an environmental space. You're right to say that there isn't loads of funding available, particularly actually for environmentally focused startups. But our product is really good and it does speak for itself in a lot of ways. And our founder, Henrik, is just an absolute visionary, and he's brilliant at helping people to really understand the value and bringing them on the journey. And we've got a handful of really committed and knowledgeable and capable VC funders who are just phenomenal, and they're really working hard for our business as well. So we're incredibly lucky.
Just a couple of other questions as we kind of close up. Looking back at your journey, what would you say is one defining moment that shaped who you are today?
From a career perspective, it has to be that opportunity that I took to cover a maternity leave for 6 months, where I was then managing the biggest team that I'd ever managed. I literally had 2 hours to decide whether I was going to take that opportunity or not. So I had to be very brave. There were definitely tears. I phoned my husband. It was complicated, but I'm really glad I was brave enough to take it, because I've never regretted it and I haven't looked back. And that literally was a turning point for my career, because I have now pursued a more management focused and leadership focused career because of that experience. And at the time, it felt like a monumental decision, but actually looking back on it, I was actually only making a decision based on the next 6 months, because if I hated it, I could have gone back and pursued a much more deeply technical career path. So in hindsight, it feels like I made a bit of a mountain out of it, but it was definitely a turning point for me.
And based on that, if there was one bit of advice that you would give, other people, other women who are aspiring to enter engineering or even leadership roles, what would that be?
Well, be brave.
Yeah.
But also don't second guess yourself. I think that as women, we have that internal voice that can be quite critical sometimes. And so it's about recognizing that you've been put in a place in your work because of what you know, and what you have to say is valuable. So just assume that people are going to listen to you. Speak up and contribute, and get yourself a great mentor who you trust. It doesn't have to be a woman, but somebody that you feel really understands you and that you can trust to give you good advice and ask good questions. Most of my mentors don't tell me what to do. They just ask a lot of questions and lead me to my own conclusions, which is just such a good skill.
Oh, it's amazing. It's the whole point is as a mentor, you're trying to get them to think about their problems themselves and not try to find the solutions for them. Yeah, I've had a couple of mentors and I agree, those have been the best ones.
And actually,
I
also the peer mentors can be absolutely brilliant as well. It doesn't have to be someone that's more senior than you in your business or in a career. Having someone at a similar level to you can be really brilliant for as a sounding board and to bounce ideas off. And I've had really fantastic mentoring relationships or co-mentoring relationships with people too.
completely agree with that. And with yourself, Jessica, for what excites you most about your future, whether it's in your career.
I am quite a simple creature, Dee, and I still get really excited about clever technology, and especially if it has a purpose. So, from my perspective, I'm excited about anything that's pushing boundaries when it comes to changing the way that we do things for the better of human or environmental health. So, great examples of that would be there's a really wonderful movement within the packaging industry at the moment, moving away from plastic based single use packaging. Um, there's a wonderful woman called Lucy Hughes who's runs a company called Marina Tex, and they're making packaging and other plastic alternative materials from waste from the fish industry. And there's a brilliant company based out of Bristol called Kelpie who make seaweed based packaging materials. So I love that innovation and sustainability, but also functionality to like married together. That's just brilliant. And recently, I've become more aware of some similar things, but in the building industry. So I'm now part of an accelerator group at the Royal Academy of Engineering, and in my cohort, there are a couple of guys. One is working with concrete that's made from bacteria, and the other one is working with plant-based fiberboard. So it's an alternative to fiberboard in the construction industry, but made with a, a plant alternative. I just think that's so innovative. And you know, so many of these industries have such large hidden CO2 emissions. So the idea that people are able to tackle that in a more sustainable way, I really hope that those things grow and become more commercially available because I just think it's really amazing.
Oh yeah, I think we're slowly tackling it in different kind of angles, aren't we? It's food, it's technology. It's brilliant seeing all of those things. I think we're at the end of the podcast now, but thank you so much, Jessica, for everything that you've shared. You've been absolutely phenomenal. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everyone who listens will feel the same as well.
That's very sweet of you, dear. It's been a really enjoyable experience, and it's really given me a chance to think about what's important to me. And to some extent, that's kind of reinvigorated my passions, which is really nice.
Oh, that's really nice to hear. Thank you. No, I'm glad you feel that way.
I
I
agree.
think anyone who listens to the podcast is always going to be learning something new, and I hope it inspires people, your journey. And
I
I
hope
hope,
so too.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Take care.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. A huge thank you to Jessica for sharing her story, her insights, and the incredible work that she's doing to drive sustainable change through engineering and leadership. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might find it valuable. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a message for a chat. Thank you for listening to She Speak, where we celebrate women shaping tech and innovation. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep speaking up.